Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Saturday, December 27th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 55.2 degrees, with a low dipping to 48.0 degrees, so layer up for a crisp winter day outdoors. Coming up, we'll examine Russia's motivations behind launching its most intense strike on Kyiv right before peace negotiations begin, and break down the sweeping reforms California is rolling out to safeguard consumers in the car buying process. Plus, other key stories from around the world that you won't want to miss. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. A massive wave of strikes hit Kyiv just hours before high-stakes talks. Ethan's been tracking the details for us. Ethan, what happened overnight?
It was one of the most intense barrages of the war, and it landed right before tomorrow's summit between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. Ukraine says Russia launched nearly 500 drones and around 40 missiles, including Kinzhal hypersonic and Iskander ballistic missiles, plus Kalibr cruise missiles. The Guardian reports the salvos targeted energy infrastructure and residential areas around the capital, and Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko urged people to shelters as explosions and debris caused widespread damage. According to Kyiv Post, roughly 320,000 households in the region lost power or heat as temperatures hovered near 0 degrees Celsius.
Were air defenses able to blunt the strikes?
They intercepted many incoming threats, but not enough to prevent casualties and serious damage. Emergency services confirmed at least one death and more than 20 injuries, including children, in Kyiv and nearby towns like Bila Tserkva. Euromaidan Press noted that intercepts still rained down debris, and that's what sparked fires and knocked out power lines. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, called the operation, quote, negotiation through fire, end quote, arguing the timing was meant to undercut tomorrow's diplomacy.
So the timing wasn't an accident?
Ukrainian officials clearly don't think so. Zelensky said the barrage was, quote, Russia's answer to the possibility of peace, end quote, accusing Moscow of trying to show leverage on the eve of talks, according to RBC.UA's recap of his telegram statements. ISW told readers the scale and focus on Kyiv set this apart from typical winter grid strikes. The Guardian framed it as a message designed to arrive at the summit from a perceived position of strength.
How does this compare to what we saw earlier this week?
It follows a harsh pattern. Just 4 days ago, on Christmas Eve, Russia launched a larger nationwide attack that Kyiv Post tallied at more than 650 drones and dozens of missiles, causing rolling blackouts across the country. Yuri Boyechko of the NGO Hope for Ukraine told Dev Discourse that holiday-timed barrages weaponize civilian suffering to force concessions, calling them a blunt rejection of Western peace efforts. Yesterday's strike compounded the damage, and ITV's coverage of regional alerts noted Poland's scrambled jets and activated ground defenses as a precaution, given the proximity to its border.
What's the immediate situation in Kyiv suburbs?
It's tough and getting colder. Neighborhoods around the capital are reporting prolonged outages, with district boilers and water pumps offline and cell networks strained. Kyiv Post described emergency warming centers reopening, while city crews race to isolate damaged lines and restore hospitals first. The sub-zero wind chills mean every hour without heat is dangerous, especially for seniors and families with small children.
Let's talk about the talks. What's on the table tomorrow?
Zelensky and Trump are expected to review a 20-point peace framework that Zelensky says is roughly 90% complete. Politico reports it's a streamlined revision of an earlier 28-point draft centering on long-term security guarantees, reconstruction, economic cooperation, and territorial questions. One idea under discussion is a 15-year security pact that would try to mirror NATO's collective defense logic without formal membership. There are also proposals tied to post-war investment and potential U.S. access deals for Ukraine's rare earth minerals.
Where are the sticking points?
The big ones are Donbass and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The draft reportedly suggests freezing front lines where they stand. creating a demilitarized free economic zone in parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, and using international monitors to verify pullbacks by both sides. The Washington-based ISW cautions that such freezes can lock in Russian gains, if not paired with enforceable security guarantees, while The Guardian says the proposal aims to reduce civilian suffering and economic collapse. On the plant, there's a U.S. idea for a trilateral consortium, Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S. each taking a third, led by an American manager, whereas Zelensky prefers a bilateral U.S.-Ukraine framework focused on safety and energy distribution.
What's Zelensky said about any territorial compromise?
He's insisted any deal that touches borders would be put to a nationwide referendum, but only after a 60-day ceasefire to ensure safe voting. He reiterated that today, posting on Telegram and through the office of the President of Ukraine, that frontline shelling makes a fair vote impossible without a pause. Kyiv Post and RBC.UA both picked up his line that security guarantees need to be ironclad if people are to trust the process. It's a way to claim democratic legitimacy on the toughest questions.
Legally, can Ukraine even hold that vote right now?
Not under the current rules. Verfassungs's blog lays out that the law on the legal regime of martial law bans national referendums during martial law, and the Constitution's Article 157 blocks changes to territorial integrity in wartime. The law on all Ukrainian referendums also restricts votes that could violate state borders, with criminal penalties in Article 110 of the Criminal Code for actions aimed at such changes. There's also a practical barrier under the law on temporarily occupied territories. People in those areas can't vote, which collides with constitutional guarantees of universal suffrage.
Is there any workaround being discussed?
There's a path, but it's complex and politically fraught. The Verkhovna Rada would need to lift martial law or pass tailored wartime voting rules, secure review by the Constitutional Court, and update referendum procedures to meet constitutional standards. Verfassungs's blog notes a parliamentary working group led by Oleksandr Kordayenko has been drafting options, with fresh talks reported late today in Kyiv. Even then, election administrators would need time to set up secure polling and verification systems, especially if parts of the country remain under threat.
How's Moscow framing its strikes and the talks?
The Kremlin is dismissing the U.S. plan as a Western ploy. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told state media the 20-point proposal is, quote, fundamentally different, end quote, from a prior 27-point concept, they say, was discussed with U.S. envoys in Miami, a claim carried by CGTN's monitoring of Russian statements. Russia's defense ministry called the targets energy facilities used by Ukraine's military and industrial sites, casting the barrage as retaliation for Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. But The Guardian and ISW underline the precision timing and unprecedented focus on Kyiv itself, arguing this was about leverage, not routine military necessity.
What's Trump saying as he heads into this meeting?
He's positioning himself as the final arbiter. In a Politico interview yesterday, he said Zelensky, quote, doesn't have anything until I approve it, end quote, while also saying there's a, quote, good shot, end quote, at a constructive outcome. His team, including mediators Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, has coordinated indirectly with Russian intermediaries, Politico reports, but hasn't tweaked the nuclear plant or Donbas proposals in response to today's strikes. He plans to follow the Zelensky meeting with a call to Vladimir Putin, betting economic pressures could pry concessions.
Are European leaders part of this conversation?
They're not in the room, but they want a voice. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has urged remote EU involvement to present a unified Western front, according to coverage summarized by Kyiv Post. European capitals support the architecture of a deal, but they're wary that unilateral U.S. bargaining could sideline EU security interests. That tension has hovered since a contentious Oval Office episode back in February, which The Guardian remembered as a turning point in how these talks were run.
How are Ukrainians reacting on the ground?
With a mix of resilience and fatigue, social posts from Kyiv residents, compiled by Euromaidan Press, described last night's barrage as a pointed provocation, not a coincidence, while they queued for generators and charged phones at subway stations. Mayor Klitschko asked people to stay in shelters and conserve power once the grid came back in patches, acknowledging the strain on hospitals and water systems. The humanitarian cost is exactly the pressure point analysts think Moscow wants to exploit ahead of any ceasefire bargaining.
You mentioned security guarantees. What do those look like in practice?
Negotiators are exploring defense commitments short of full NATO membership. Politico and Kyiv Post both describe a long-term pact in which the U.S. and partners would pledge military aid, joint training, rapid resupply, and air defense coverage designed to deter future attacks. ISW has warned that guarantees must be enforceable, with clear triggers, or else a demilitarized zone could become an invitation to probe and salami slice. Zelensky keeps using the word, quote, ironclad, end quote, to signal that anything less won't fly at home.
What about reconstruction and the economy?
That's the part negotiators hope can lock in peace dividends. Draft elements include a multi-year reconstruction package, private sector incentives, and potential U.S. participation in Ukraine's rare earth mining and processing, which Euromaidan Press says Kyiv views as both economic lifeline and strategic tie. Kyiv Post notes that a free economic zone in the east, if it comes with real security, could speed industrial restart and jobs for displaced workers. But all of that hinges on credible guarantees and a ceasefire that holds.
Where does the Zaporizhzhia plant debate stand after today's strike?
Positions seem unchanged, despite the escalation. The U.S. proposal for a three-way management consortium, one-third each for Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S., under an American manager, remains controversial in Kyiv, which favors a two-party U.S.-Ukraine setup focused on safety and grid stability. ISW cautions that any arrangement must address physical security, staffing, and IAEA oversight, or risk setting up a permanent flashpoint. Ukraine worries a trilateral board could hand Russia a veto over its energy lifeline.
Has anything from today altered the draft's 90% completion?
Not on paper, at least publicly. Politico says Trump's team hasn't amended the ZNPP or Donbas planks in response to the barrage, and Kyiv's pre-summit statements talk about harder lines on security, not a rewrite. A senior Western official told The Guardian the architecture is nearly done, but, quote, Moscow is still setting the tempo, end quote. That's why tonight's explosions felt like a negotiating gambit more than a battlefield turning point.
We're almost 5 years into this war. What's the broader trajectory?
Vladimir Putin designated 2025 as the, quote, year of the defender of the fatherland, end quote, which Kyiv Post reads as branding for a long war footing. European leaders fear a drawn-out contest of endurance that tests public patience and budgets. ISW argues Russia hopes to outlast Western resolve while carving leverage through periodic escalations like this. The strategy is attritional, measured in blackouts and air raid nights for Kyiv's families.
Are there any official readouts expected tonight?
Not before tomorrow's meeting. As of this evening, Kyiv time, there were no formal readouts, just pre-summit notes from the Office of the President of Ukraine, statements from Trump's team, and Kremlin talking points. Everyone's holding positions, and today's barrage hasn't derailed the framework, at least outwardly. The real test is whether the talks can lock in security measures strong enough to make a ceasefire real.
Bottom line, Ethan, how should we read this moment?
It's coercive diplomacy in the open. The Guardian and ISW both say the barrage was a table setter, aimed at reminding negotiators that Moscow wants to bargain from pressure, not parity. Zelensky's answer is to push for hardened guarantees and democratic validation through a referendum, even as Verfassungs's blog warns the legal and logistical hurdles are towering. Tomorrow's meeting is a make-or-break step toward a plan that's mostly written, but not yet anchored in the security realities Ukrainians need.
Ethan, thank you for breaking that down so clearly.
Thanks, Grace.
California's changing how we buy cars, with some big protections on the way. Chloe, walk us through what's new.
The headline is a sweeping consumer protection package built around Senate Bill 766, the CARS Act. Governor Gavin Newsom signed it in early October, and most of the rules kick in next October, so in about 10 months from today. CalMatters and LAist call it a rewrite of the sales playbook, aiming to stop bait-and-switch pricing, junk add-ons, and buyer's remorse traps. It's modeled after the Federal Trade Commission's now vacated National Cars Rule, which LAist says could still save Californians roughly $234 million a year in avoided scams.
What pushed lawmakers to go this far?
Complaints. Auto sales have led California's fraud reports for years, and prices remain painfully high. Senator Ben Allen told CalMatters he went undercover in 2024 to shop for a used Mustang Mach-E and ran into classic hustle tactics, and that personal experience shaped the bill. The San Jose Mercury News says the politics were bipartisan but hard-fought, with dealers and consumer advocates trading concessions.
The return policy is getting a lot of attention. What exactly changes there?
For used cars under $50,000, buyers get an automatic 3-business-day return right, no questions asked. That's a big shift from the old 2-day option that required paying extra and didn't cover everyone, which the 2007 Car Buyers Bill of Rights allowed but didn't mandate. According to LAist, you can cancel for any reason, as long as you keep the mileage under 400 and return the car undamaged. Dealers can charge a restocking fee, capped at 1.5%, with at least $200 and no more than $600.
Does that cover gig drivers and small businesses too?
It does. CalMatters reports the new return right extends to rideshare drivers and small businesses buying commercial vehicles under that price threshold, which closes a loophole. If a dealer has already sold your trade-in, the law forces them to make you whole at the higher of the fair market value, the contract value, or what they resold it for. Consumer advocates told LAist that piece finally puts teeth behind the promise of a real return window.
And the pricing itself has to be clearer. How will shoppers see that?
The bill requires an all-in price in any ad that mentions a specific vehicle and in the first written communication with a buyer, like emailed quotes or texts. The Washington Post has covered similar rules elsewhere, and the idea is simple, stop the fake low online price that balance later with, quote, market adjustments, end quote, or mandatory add-ons. The San Francisco Chronicle notes dealers must also put financing and lease terms in writing up front so buyers know the out-the-door cost before they're ushered into the finance office. It turns what used to be a tedious reveal into a transparent starting point.
You mentioned add-ons. Which ones get banned?
The law bars so-called worthless extras and even names a few that have become punchlines. Charging an EV buyer for oil changes or selling nitrogen tire fills that don't actually meet a 95% purity threshold are now per se violations. Duplicate warranties that provide no additional benefit are out too. According to LAist, this moves disputes from slow, case-by-case lawsuits under the Consumer Legal Remedies Act to clearer enforcement by the Attorney General or private suits under the new statute.
When does all of this take effect? And what do dealers have to change?
Most of it lands on October 1st, 2026, which is about 9 months after next spring's regulatory work. The DMV issued a December advisory pointing dealers to a, quote, new laws for 2026, end quote, bulletin on its industry portal, and the Attorney General has posted consumer alerts and FAQs. Comply Auto, an industry compliance firm, says stores will need to reconfigure dealer management and customer relationship systems to capture the first written communication and auto-populate compliant ads. They also have to retain records for 2 years and provide translated contracts for deals primarily done in Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, or Korean, which has been a long-standing California requirement.
You hinted at political push and pull. What compromises made it into the final bill?
Several. Early drafts floated a 10-day return window with a 2,000-mile cap and 7 years of record-keeping. By the time Newsom signed it on October 6th, those had been trimmed to 3 business days, 400 miles, and 2 years of records, with the effective date pushed back to next October. According to CalMatters and the CNCDA's own updates, those were key wins for dealers.
Remind us who's behind that dealer push.
The California New Car Dealers Association is the heavyweight there. Reporting compiled by Digital Democracy shows the group has donated more than $3 million to lawmakers since 2015, and its president, Brian Mass, told CalMatters the final bill was a, quote, net positive, end quote, for transparency without being unworkable. Rosemary Shahan, who runs the advocacy group Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety, called it, quote, historic, end quote, even with the trims. As she told LAist, the short return window and fees could still make it hard for buyers with low incomes to get a fair inspection in time.
What does this mean day-to-day for dealerships?
Revenue shifts and operational friction. Comply Auto's analysis warns that bans on junk add-ons could cost stores millions statewide, while the return window will force them to hold trade-ins for at least 3 business days or risk paying more to unwind deals. The Chronicle says legal exposure also grows because the law creates clearer pathways to sue over specific violations. Dealers tell the Mercury News they'll need to retrain sales and finance teams to avoid running afoul of the, quote, first written communication, end quote, rule.
And for buyers, what's the most tangible change?
You don't have to pay for the right to change your mind on a used car under $50,000. You'll see a real, all-in price before you invest time, and pressure to buy padded extras should ease. LAist frames it as removing the paywall from the old 2-day option and turning aspirational transparency into something enforceable. It won't fix high prices, but it should limit the most aggravating surprises.
There was also a bill about document fees that didn't make it. What happened there?
That was Senate Bill 791, a bipartisan push to raise the doc fee cap to 1% of the price, up to $260. Newsom vetoed it on October 13th, just 1 week after signing the CARS Act. His message, covered by LAist and CalMatters, said there were, quote, no new state requirements, end quote, to justify a hike, even though dealers had just been handed fresh compliance work. Brian Mass called the veto, quote, especially frustrating, end quote, given the stack of forms that lengthen buying sessions.
So the governor is threading a needle on costs and protections?
That's the balance. Keep add-on bans and return rights that save consumers money, but don't let fees creep up in the name of paperwork. The Mercury News notes the veto keeps a lid on pass-through charges at a time when vehicle prices are still elevated. It's also a signal that enforcement and clarity should come before cost shifting.
There's also a change to the lemon law. How did that shake out?
Last year's rushed reform, Assembly Bill 1755, pared back the lemon law to ease crowded courts, reducing the claim window to 6 years and putting more burden on owners to trigger arbitration. Senate Bill 26, signed this year, lets manufacturers opt out of those weaker rules and revert to the stronger pre-2024 protections. As LAist reported yesterday, Toyota and Honda chose the stronger path, citing limited prep time for the 2024 change, while GM and Ford stuck with the weaker provisions. That creates brand-by-brand differences that consumer lawyers warn will confuse buyers and prolong some disputes.
Does that patch the lemon law, or just make it more complicated?
A bit of both. The opt-out gives receptive brands a way to align with the older, stronger protections that many Californians expect. But as the Chronicle points out, shoppers may now have very different rights depending on the badge on the hood, and that's not intuitive. It also means the state's most iconic consumer law now varies in practice across the showroom floor.
How do electric vehicles and the state's climate goals factor into this?
The timing is not accidental. California still plans to require 100% zero-emission new car sales by 2035, but elevated used car prices and shaky consumer trust make that transition harder. Senator Allen chairs a committee focused on the zero-emission shift and told CalMatters he wanted the market cleaned up before that mandate bites harder. LAist suggests the CARS Act could be a model nationally, especially with the Federal Trade Commission's rule on hold and federal politics likely to challenge California's clean car agenda next year.
Are national outlets paying attention, or is this mostly in-state coverage?
Mostly in-state so far. CalMatters reporting has been republished by the Hanford Sentinel and LAist, and the Mercury News and the Chronicle have kept up with the compliance angle. NPR affiliates have highlighted the consumer impact, but you haven't seen deep dives from CNN or the New York Times yet. Industry sources like the CNCDA and Comply Auto are briefing dealers, which is where much of the practical guidance is coming from.
What should buyers do between now and next October?
Keep your receipts and get written quotes because even today, some rules on truthful advertising and total price disclosures already exist. The DMV's site and the Attorney General's consumer page both have alerts and explainers that will be updated as regulations land early next year. If you're shopping a used car, schedule a pre-purchase inspection and shop lenders first so you're less exposed to high-pressure financing pitches. And as Pasadena Now and CarConsumers.org have both advised, read any add-on line items closely. You can refuse extras that don't serve you.
And for dealers listening, what's their timeline on compliance?
The Office of Administrative Law is expected to clear detailed regulations in early 2026, and the DMV has said more bulletins are coming in the spring. Stores should be testing software changes by summer, training staff on the, quote, first written communication, end quote, rule, and building a process to hold trade-ins until the return window closes. Comply Auto warns that waiting until September could mean contract templates and ad feeds go live with errors, which then becomes a litigation risk. The consensus in the Chronicle's coverage is to treat this winter and spring as a runway, not a lull.
Bottom line, does this add up to a cleaner deal for most people?
Yes, though not perfect. The 3-day return right for used cars under $50,000 is meaningful, and the all-in price requirement should cut down on dizzying add-on surprises. The compromises reflect dealer influence, but LAist and CalMatters both say the core consumer tilt remains. Next year's enforcement will tell us how much behavior actually changes on the showroom floor.
Chloe, thanks for breaking it down.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Myanmar is voting with training wheels on December 28, 2025, as the ruling State Administration Council launches the first general election since the 2021 coup, a 3-act ballot running into January that skips at least 56 townships where resistance forces hold the stage. Critics call it a sham show. The National League for Democracy has been dissolved, and a new election protection law has already cuffed more than 200 people for speaking out. Senior General Min Aung Hlaing seeks legitimacy with China even as civil war rages. On the Thai-Cambodian frontier, guns are taking a 16-point turn for the better. On December 27, 2025, defense chiefs Natafon Narkfanit and T. Seha inked a ceasefire at Ban Pik Khat after 20 days of fighting that killed at least 101 and pushed to 1 million from their homes. The deal freezes troop movements and halts airspace violations with a 72-hour window. If calm holds, Thailand will send home 18 Cambodian prisoners of war captured since a failed July truce. An ASEAN observer team, led by Malaysia, will monitor and help families return. Foreign aid has been given a new address line, Department of State. By December 27, 2025, a year of restructuring folded USAID into state after terminating roughly 83% of programs and shrinking a 10,000-strong staff to a skeleton crew. Development obligations plunged about 65% this year, from $55.4 billion to $19.4 billion, as the model shifted from NGO partnerships to direct government deals and contracts for American firms. The overhaul ends 60 years of independent policy and recasts aid to America First, AIMS. Fallout includes disrupted therapeutic food pipelines and closure of thousands of refugee camp schools, worsening crises from South Sudan to Yemen and Bangladesh. A December 31st deadline looms to lock in multi-year bilateral pacts, with a full switch by April 2026. In Georgia, campaign cash makes a peach of a splash. An anonymous outfit, Georgians for Integrity, has poured $5 million since late November into ads, mailers, and texts, accusing Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, now a gubernatorial contender, of steering power toward a $10 billion data center tied to his family. The Georgia GOP filed an ethics complaint alleging the Delaware-incorporated group ducked registration and donor disclosure. Jones labels the claims fabricated trash and threatens legal action. Rivals Chris Carr and Brad Raffensperger say they aren't bankrolling the barrage. The case could cede precedent on donor transparency before May 2026 primary. And in Afghanistan, winter bites as aid budgets diet. More than 17 million people face crisis-level hunger, 3 million more than last year, as WFP funding has cratered by 80% amid a U.S. stop order, and more than 7 million returnees from Pakistan and Iran. With only 1 million receiving food support, down from 5.6 million in 2024, agencies are forced to triage. A stagnant economy, droughts, and quakes in Kunar compound the crunch. The UN projects 22 million need aid in 2026, but funding may reach 3.9 million, leaving 3.7 million children acutely malnourished and safety nets threadbare. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.